All rise, please, for the pledge.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm actually going to turn this over to Mr. Pinelli, and he is going to introduce our student performers.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have on stage students from the Shriver Symphony Orchestra. This is one of the 3 orchestras of the high school. We are very lucky to have a very supported and big program at the high school that kids just keep coming back and finding new classes to work in and stuff. And we're very thankful for the support of the Board of Education and administration of the building to allow that to continue all the time. So every once in a while, let's give back with the gift of the art that they were given and the skill and talent and love that they have for music. I'm going to perform for you this evening a first movement from a Carl Nielsen Little Suite for Strings, late Romantic time period, very intellectual, something you wouldn't hear in New York Philharmonic. Not an edited version, the real thing. If there was AP orchestra, this would be it. we'll see you in November. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.
I just want to thank Mr. Pinelli again and our students. I really thank our students for coming out tonight. It was such a pleasure to listen to them. So thank you again.
Ms. Callahan, can you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Mrs. Sloan, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Bear, Mr. Greenstein, Mr. Hohauser.
Hopefully, he will be joining us a little later.
Thank you. Mrs. Nadolny, Mrs. Weisberg. Thank you.
I will make a motion for the adoption of the agenda, October 20th, 2015. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson, all in favor? 6-0, thank you. We will now go to student and community comments. I would just like to remind everyone that we are having a 3-minute limit for each speaker, and we ask you to identify yourself for the record. And I see that we don't have a tremendous crowd, but I do want to just say up front, we are going to limit the community comments this evening to half an hour because we have a lot of work to do, and there will be another opportunity at the end of the meeting, again, for people to speak, but we really do have a lot of business to conduct this evening. So if the first speaker would like to step up. Of course, the night I limit it, no one wants to speak. Okay. I would just like to add that we will have a parent council meeting this Thursday at 9:30. 9:30? Yes, 9:30 in the Weber Library. And the Board of Ed, or at least 4 of us, will be there to discuss our goals for this year. So we welcome everyone to attend. We hope you will all be there. And I also wanted to mention that tomorrow evening at the Landmark, the League of Women Voters will have New York State education policy, and we will have many legislators there speaking, and we hope you will all attend that as well because it's very timely and important to all of us in the community and especially in the school district. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Dr. Mooney. First, Mrs. Johnson will give out some certificates.
This is regarding the semifinalists, the students who are semifinalists for the 2016 National Merit Scholarship Program. Schreiber High School was informed by the National Merit Scholarship Corporation that 5 students in the class of 2016 have qualified for semifinalist classification in the National Merit Scholarship Program. Approximately 1.5 million students nationwide took the qualifying test, and approximately 16,000 students have earned the designation as semifinalists in the competition. The students now will complete an application form that includes information about academic performance, as well as a recommendation from the school counselor. This supporting documentation will be crucial in determining whether students become finalists in the process. The entire school community is very proud of the students' achievement and wishes them well in the next stage of the process. This is really a great thing. Congratulations. And we have Seth, I don't know if they're here, but Seth Barchet. If you're here, please come up. I don't know if they, okay. William Day. Tiger Gao. Isabella Soldano. Congratulations. And last but not least, Maxwell Silverstein. Congratulations.
now we will turn it over to Dr. Mooney.
Thank you. I just want to offer my congratulations to our National Merit Series finalist winners as well. I just have a few comments tonight. As Mrs. Sloan mentioned, we actually have a couple of presentations this evening. One thing I did just want to remind everyone that tomorrow is our Unity Day celebration, and there will be, our Unity Day is for bullying prevention and education with our students. There are activities happening in all of the buildings tomorrow. The culminating activity is tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock at the Schreiber track for our Unity Day walk. Wear your orange, and we're very excited to have the day. It's sponsored by the Safety and Substance Abuse Task Force, and it's just an event that started last year, and we're very, very pleased that this is now becoming an annual event for the school district. So wear your orange tomorrow. I just wanted to thank again our Ed Foundation. That last week they awarded 39 grants to staff in our school district, for the most part, the majority of the grants, to teachers and administrators. And on Saturday night, they held one of their great fundraisers, the Amazing Race. So I just have to give a thank you and a shout out, of course, to all of our participants, the various teams. We had a couple of teacher teams that participated. The administrators had a team, various groups. And I just have to proudly say, as a member of the administrator team, we did perform better than the last time they ran the race. So last time we came in 9th, this time we came in 6th. We were fewer administrators, and I'm kind of disabled, so I don't know how that happened, but we're proud of our performance. So, and we thank, of course, the Ed Foundation again for everything that they do. And just a reminder to our staff that Hearts has extended their grant application. Their grant application cycle is at this time of the year, so we certainly encourage people to bring their creativity to those grants as well. At the high school this week, we have started our middle states. I shouldn't say we've begun our middle states review. We've been working on the review for quite some time in preparation. The visiting team is here. We had a welcome reception for them this afternoon. I also want to thank several of our board members who took the time to attend that. And I know the high school staff, along with Dr. Westervelt, has been working very diligently in preparation for that visit, as well as our HSA, parents. There's input from students. It's a big process. It's an important process. Assistant Principal Julie Torres and one of our social studies teachers, Alicia Cotter, are the co-chairs at Schreiber, but I also know they're building on the work that Assistant Principal Dave Miller had done in years past in chairing or co-chairing that committee. So we will be meeting with the team, and the team will be visiting our schools from tonight until Friday. So we welcome them, and we're happy to accommodate them too. Mrs. Sloan mentioned the parent council meeting on Thursday, and again, I just want to emphasize, parent council is usually at the Port Washington Library. It's usually on a Monday. The meeting is on Thursday, and it's in the Weber Library. So we look forward to our parents attending. Just a little bit more educational business. It is on the agenda tonight. The board is going to be approving a resolution that the district is going to be seeking a hardship waiver for our APPR plan. But what I want to emphasize in that is, and thank both our teacher and our principal bargaining units. They have been negotiating with the district in good faith. It's a very complicated plan, and we have been meeting regularly, and we will continue to meet regularly, but it is really the most appropriate thing for us to do at this time to apply for a hardship waiver. That's kind of my updates for now, and I will turn it over to Ms. Fennick to just go through the enrollment report.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney. As of October 14th, we have 5,457 students. Last year at the same time, we had 5,347 students, a difference of 110. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that when we get to this point, it sort of gets glossed over, but there are a number of things that I think just as a general board and as a community we should be aware of. 110 additional students is quite a lot year over year. When you look at the historical numbers, we haven't trended anywhere near that in one lump sum. And also from a historical point of view, the driver has really been the bottom up, where we've had increasing numbers of kindergarten students. However, this year we actually had a decrease year over year for the second year in kindergarten enrollment, but we've had a tremendous growth at the Weber Middle School, where we've had 47 new children come in, and also at Schreiber, where there are 41. Part of the other driver that is interesting is we have now a number of what are termed refugee students who are being enrolled, mostly coming from Central and South America. They are coming under part of Homeland Security's characterization of that, and I raise this not as a political issue or just simply as a fact of something we have to deal with. In just looking at it with the couple questions, it appears that it is stressing our E&L program at the high school because they were unexpected and not somewhat accounted for. We also had 5 more enrolled just today or yesterday, and there appears to be no information forthcoming on how many more students we may be asked to take under this program or who may arrive here. Coupled with that, regulations went into effect on January or the middle of January 15 on our ability as a school district to actually ask for certain documentation, which makes it, I don't want to say onerous, but it makes it more difficult for us to look at each person independently and determine whether they are in fact entitled to be educated here. As we said a couple meetings ago, our actual cost per student or money that we spent per child has decreased for the first time due to the enrollment jumping by 110 year over year. When you start to project some of these numbers out, we are just short of 1,600 here in Schreiber. We're now over 1,200 at Weber. And the other thing that happened is 4 of the 6 grades at the elementary school went up. We even had 15 more. Even though kindergarten went down, we had a huge jump in first grade growth this year, year over year. It's just something we need to be aware of as we go through the cycle, as we plan for future size. We will at some point in the not too distant future surpass 1,300 at Weber. We will most likely surpass even 1,700 here in Schreiber, which is still another 100 plus. And if the numbers play out, we might even approach 1,800. And that is just something that we need to be aware of as far as teachers. One of the things we're talking about here is section size, and it's an agenda item. And even though in the elementary school we are, I think should be proud that we're still averaging roughly 22 across the entire 110 roughly sections that we have. These kind of trends will change the dynamic of space and how many teachers we need, class sizes, how many sections of 30-something, what we have to do to support certain populations in certain buildings. All of that stuff is coming very quickly upon us, and much faster than we would have anticipated even 6 months ago. This change in enrollment, if we see another year or two like this, just the overall population that we are being asked to educate will stress us across every building that we have without necessarily the available resources. And it will be a driver when we start to talk about March, April, May, the budget. And just something to be aware of overall as a board, as a community, that we are, for whatever reason, now seeing an increased influx. There is some discussion of that there appears now to be a movement underway where residents here, and this is 100% hearsay, and I will put it there, that children are arriving and being sheltered here to attend school in what may not be the most legitimate manner. And again, if those trends continue, we will reach a point where our ability to somewhat wedge it in just through efficiency will be challenged in every way, shape, or form. And given the somewhat non-increase in Social Security, that it was flat year over year, and the limiting amount of the tax cap, all of those drivers are now colliding simultaneously, at least here in Port Washington, and is something to be reckoned with over the next 4 or 5 months as we talk about it.
I just wanted to ask, when does kindergarten registration begin?
I believe it starts in January. We've been doing it a little bit earlier.
And when do we get the number, our levy number?
The levy number? The levy number comes sometime in January as well, usually around the middle of the month.
So I would like to suggest that we are going to have to think about some kind of community conversations sometime in January, because it's been brought up a lot about piercing the tax cap. So once we know the number, we'll be able to have more intelligent conversations and hear the community input on that. And also in January, actually I guess really in December, I think we need to start discussing with kindergarten registration, perhaps some kind of better planning on our sections, that we may not be able to honor what has previously been the catchment for various kindergartens, depending on the other needs in those buildings. If we don't have enough classroom space, we might be having to send kids to other schools, and I think it's something we have to start looking at sooner rather than later. So before planning, before kindergarten registration begins, we may just have to say we don't know where you're going yet, but we have to at least be looking at that. Okay. Make a motion for the approval of minutes for October 6, 2015. Mrs. Johnson, second. All in favor? 6-0. Thank you. And now we will go to our discussion item. Mrs. Callahan, you want to lead the audit?
Yes, I would like to introduce to the community and to the Board of Education Tricia Lucas from Darkangelo, our external auditor. Darkangelo has been performing the external audit for the district for about 5 years now, and I'm pleased to say that we're giving them a hard time, which means we're giving them everything that they want, and they keep looking for more and more, and everything seems to be in good order, but I don't want to speak for Ms. Lucas. I will just let her get up and report out for you. Thank you, Tricia.
Good evening. As Mary said, I'm going to be reporting on the external audit for Port Washington. This is for the year ended June 30th of 2015. There is one thing that I would like to just discuss quickly prior to getting into the actual financial statements. There was a new standard that was effective for the current year. It was GASB number 68. And what GASB number 68 did was it required the district to recognize on your books the overfunded or unfunded asset or liability that relates to the pension plans, both the TRS and the ERS. So in the current year, the TRS or pension plan is overfunded, so there's a new asset on the district's books, and the ERS plan is slightly underfunded. So that was a new GASB that's effective for the current year, and you'll see how it affects the financial statements as we go through the presentation. Turning to pages 1 and 2, does everybody have a bound copy of the financials? Okay. Turning to pages 1 and 2, this is the independent auditor's report. Once again, Port Washington received an unmodified or a clean opinion, which is the highest level or the best opinion that you can receive, and it is what you are accustomed to receiving. On the bottom of page 1, there is a new paragraph in the opinion. It's titled New Accounting Standard. Because it had such a significant effect on the financial statements, it did require its own paragraph within the independent auditor's report. If you please turn to page 5. Page 5 details out your assets, liabilities, and your net position at the end of the year, and it is in comparative format to the assets, liabilities, and net position at the end of June 30th, 2014 as well. You will notice over the 2014 column, it does say restated. The 2014 numbers needed to be restated due to the implementation of GASB 68. And I'll go through that restatement with you as well. Your current and other assets are $75.8 million, which was a significant increase over the previous year. There was a $41 million increase over the previous year. That was a result of GASB 68. There was a TRS asset of almost $42 million that was put on the district's books, an increase in asset year over year. At the end of 2014, the TRS pension plan was overfunded approximately a little over $2 million, and in the current year, it was overfunded approximately $44 million. So there was a $42 million overfunding increase that is Port Washington's proportionate share of that overfunding. The TRS plan is funded at 111%, so it is 11% overfunded, and your portion of that overfunding is $44 million. That is, I want to make it clear that although it's an asset on your books, it's for financial statement presentation purposes only. It's not something you're going to be getting a refund for. It does not affect your general fund. It does not affect your budgeting for the year, in that they predict that to be smoothed out over future years through the adjustment of the rates. Your capital assets were $73.4 million. You did have additions of about $1 million, but that was offset by depreciation expense of $1.9 million. Your deferred outflows of resources, that is a newer line item once again for GASB 68, that $12.3 million, that it was a result of the TRS reporting. And I would also like to mention that the numbers for both the TRS and the ERS reporting purposes in this financial statements were provided by the plans. So the plans were audited on an individual basis. Their auditors and actuaries sent the individual districts the numbers and the reporting requirements that you needed to be included in these financial statements. Your total liabilities were $148 million. Your long-term liabilities increased about $6.8 million. Most of that was due to an increase in your OPEB, which is the post-retirement health benefits. That increased approximately $12 million, and it was offset by payment on bonds of approximately $4 million. Your current and other liabilities were about $20.7 million, up about 1.3 from the previous year, and that was a result of an increase in the amount due to TRS of about $1 million. Your deferred inflows of resources, the $31 million, you'll notice a significant increase over the previous year. Once again, that is a direct result of GASB 68. Most of that was because there was such a large asset from the TRS plan that needed to be recorded on your books. It generated this deferred inflows of resources, so it didn't all hit your income statement all in one year. That is going to be smoothed out or amortized over a 5-year period so that it evens out the expense that hits your income statement. Then you have net position of a deficit of $17.6 million. You do have net investment in capital assets of $28.9 million. That is your fixed assets offset by depreciation and long-term debt. restricted amounts of $6.7 million, which are your reserves, which we'll go into detail in a moment, and then you have an unrestricted deficit of $53 million. The biggest reason for the deficit of $53 million is you have an OPEB liability on your books for $85 million, and that, once again, is the post-retirement health benefits that you offer your employees as a benefit. If you please turn to page 6. Page 6 details out your revenues and expenses for both years ended June 30th, 14 and 15. You'll notice your revenues were pretty consistent. There was an increase of about $2 million. And if you look in the property taxes and star line item, you'll see the increase is right there, about $2.4 million. You did have a slight increase in state aid of about $400,000. Down in the expenses, your expenses, it appears, decreased by $12 million. Once again, though, that's a direct result of GASB 68, the way that it needed to be recorded. Because there was such a large asset, there was an offset credits to your expenses. And again, this is on a GASB 34 presentation, so it's all your funds collapsed into one. It's not just the general fund, and that the $12,170,000 is a GASB 34 adjustment. If you please turn to page 9. I always like to review this page. This gives you all of your fund balances by fund, and it does break it out into the 5 categories: non-spendable, restricted, assigned, and unassigned. There's also a committed category, which you do not have any committed fund balance. Your non-spendable is about $1.5 million. That consists of prepaids, mostly due to the health insurance. You have restricted amounts of almost $5.4 million. Those are your reserves, your unemployment, your retirement, your EBLR, and then your workers' comp reserve. You'll notice those are very consistent from year to year, only increasing in total of about $11,000. That was just interest that was credited to those reserves. You have assigned fund balance of $2,013,000. $1,013,000 of that is for encumbrances or carryovers of purchase orders. And then you have appropriated for subsequent year budget of $1 million. You will notice in the previous year it was almost $4 million. That did decrease $3 million to the $1 million that you've appropriated for the 15-16 year budget. Then you have an unassigned fund balance of $4,097,000. That is 2.83% of the subsequent year budget. You are allowed to have up to 4% of subsequent year budget. School lunch, $615,000. You have a little bit of debt service fund balance of $165,000 that is reserved for debt payments only. And then you have your capital projects fund that is a deficit of almost $4.3 million. You will notice the largest portion of that is the $5.4 million in the unassigned deficit. Those are capital projects that have been started. They just haven't been permanently financed yet. You do have a $7 million ban outstanding, and once that ban is turned into permanent financing, it will reverse that deficit. Any questions so far? Okay. I would like to point out on page 34, there are approximately 6 new pages of notes in the financial statements this year because of GASB 68. In the previous year, the pension note maybe span over about 1.5 pages. It is now 6 pages long. It starts out with ERS and ends with TRS. And once again, this information is provided directly from the plans provided to the individual districts to be included in your financial statements. If you turn to page 44, I just want to point out the prior period adjustment note. Once again, because GASB 68 was effective in the current year, you started out with an asset or a liability for the plan. So the previous year's statements had to be restated. You, as previously stated, you had a $32.3 million deficit. After the restatement, because of the asset that had to be booked on your financial statements, it increased about $10.9 million, increasing or decreasing your deficit to $21.4 million. So that's a new note. That's a prior period adjustment note. Just quickly, I'd like to look at page 45. 45 gives you the details to your general fund on a standalone basis. This is what you're more accustomed to receive or to looking at in the information that you're receiving throughout the year. It's typically on the general fund on a standalone basis. This page, 45, gives you the original budget, final budget, and actual numbers, and then a variance column so you can see what line items were over or under budget. So on the bottom of page 45, the third number up from the bottom, the general fund had a deficit of $1,050,000 in the current year. There are also two new schedules that are included as required supplementary information this year in the financial statements. It's pages 47 and 48. Page 47 just gives you a 10-year history of the ERS and TRS required contributions and the rates. And if you turn to page 48, this is where it details out Port Washington's proportionate share of the asset or liability for both plans. The top of page 48 is the ERS plan. You will see that you had a liability of $1.4 million at the end of 2015. I shouldn't say at the end of 2015. Their plan year ends in March, so it's as of March of 2015. And the bottom number under the top portion for ERS, you'll see the 97.9%. That is the funding percentage of the plan. So the ERS plan at the end of March of 2015 was underfunded by 2.1%. That's why you have a $1.4 million liability. If you move down to the bottom of page 48, that's the TRS plan. You'll notice that last number in the 2014 column was 111%. The TRS plan, once again, was overfunded by 11%. And you will see that the district's proportionate share of the net pension asset was at $44.5 million. So those are two new schedules that I just want to make sure that I point out. At page 52, this starts the single audit portion of the audit. Port Washington was required to have a single audit in the current year. The single audit was required because you spent in excess of $500,000 in federal funds. I'm happy to report that there were no significant deficiencies and no material weaknesses that were noted in the single audit. And once again, you did receive an unmodified or a clean opinion on the single audit programs as well. We did test your Title I program and your school lunch programs. Those thresholds are changing in the upcoming years. It's $500,000 this year. Next year it will be $750,000. Unfortunately, you still are above that threshold, and you will need single audits in subsequent years as well. So that gives you a brief overview of the financial statements. Excuse me. D'Arcangelo and Company also, we issued a management letter, which is required communications at the conclusion of the audit. And the audit went extremely well once again. We did have one recommendation that we've reported in the management letter. It's in the third page of the management letter. And there was a little bit of a transition with your internal claims auditor in the current year. And there were just a couple of recommendations that we have put in this management letter. We're recommending that the internal claims auditor review all bidding documentation when she's going through and approving the warrants, and that check numbers are tracked to ensure that that she attains completeness and all checks are being looked at. So that was the one recommendation we had in the current year. And if you turn the next page, that's a status of prior year. The long-range plan and disaster recovery plan was implemented in the current year, so that will no longer be a comment and will drop off next year. In addition, you're required to have a separate audit of your extracurricular funds. The extracurricular report was distributed as well, along with both required letters for the extracurricular funds. Once again, everything went well. We were in here for about 3 or 4 days in May or June, and then another 4 to 5 days in August, and then all of the reporting, preparation, and risk assessment happens within the office. Anybody have any questions? I know that's a lot.
I just want to go back to page 45 for a second, please. Basically, when I look at this, overall, our revenues were shorter than we estimated, but our expenses at the same time were less. I'm just trying to follow sort of page 9 and 45. I get the end result, but we had originally thought that our unassigned fund balance was going to decrease by the 3.9 million year over year. And the end result is the fund balance actually only declined by $1,049,000.
If you look at page 45, your revenues were actually over budget by $809,000.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Got
That's
it.
okay. And, okay, so let's start in the original budget column. Your appropriated fund balance was $4.2 million. So you anticipated you were going to use $4.2 million of your fund balance. So the $809,000, that was almost $1 million of additional revenue that came in. You were in a deficit position, so you had expenditures over revenues of $1 million in the current year. And then in addition, you had expenditures that were under budget by almost $1.4 million. So you anticipated spending $144 million. You spent $142 million. You had encumbrances of $1 million. So you only spent $143 million, leaving you with, you did not spend $1.4 million of your budget. Correct.
And I think also, if you look on page 10, there are just some additional items that go into that opening fund balance and how we wind up with the closing unassigned fund balance. Rosemary and I wind up going through this in early March or February when we give you those initial fund balance proposals as we do the budget. I would say that when we look at page 9, while overall, anybody looking at it that sees that the unassigned fund balance now, it's $1,100,000 greater than it was last year. And when we were working on the budget, I did not anticipate that. I really thought that we were going to ultimately wind up being much closer to the controller's fiscal stress issues. But as Tricia stated, because of the under expenditures in about 4 or 5 areas of the budget, we unexpended the budget and our revenues came in slightly higher than what had been projected, and that's what saved us.
Just staying with that, we went into the year thinking we had a mortgage of sort of $3.9 million that we had to overcome. So at the moment, we have overcome that and put money back into fund balance so that when we do now the 16-17 budget, we are not theoretically starting with any negative at the moment. We are at a clean zero, if you will.
Yes, yes, because this closing statement has taken into account the $1 million that the board has contributed to the current year's budget, the 15-16 budget. That $1 million has already been accounted for. So we're starting out with 4.1 in unassigned money, where last year we were at 2.9. $2.9 was our unassigned balance, and now we're up to 4.
Because we had already thought we were putting in 3.9 million.
Yes.
Yeah, I just like to say that having a management letter with only one recommendation is pretty extraordinary, and that good audits don't just happen. Independent auditors are just that. They're independent. They're not our advocates. They're not trying to push things in our direction. So it's just another indication of how good Mary and her crew are in keeping our records and providing what is needed and keeping us all on track when we try to go crazy and spend too much money.
Well, our treasurer is here this evening, Rosemary Ruggiero. I must say that Rosemary has taken and always does take the lead on the day-to-day financials with any of the issues. Everybody's running into Rosemary's office, whether it's general fund, grant funds. She has directors calling her every day. How do I do this, Rosemary? How do I transfer money here? And she deals directly with the banks. So I must say, Rosemary and the full staff in the business office, they all work very cooperatively, and I'm very appreciative of all their assistance.
I just have to add my thanks to Mary and Rosemary and the entire staff as well. And I say this every year, but we get such good reports, and it doesn't happen by accident. And we all sleep a little bit better with you leading the way, Mary. So thank you. And I think we have no more questions, right? No. So thank you very much for that very rapid report. And now we can move on to our second discussion item. Dr. Westervelt.
Yes, Dr. Westervelt is going to review for us our 3 through 8 assessment results. It's quite a comprehensive report, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Westervelt.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney, and good evening, everyone. If you haven't had enough fun with numbers, let me give you a few more. So as everybody is aware, under the No Child Left Behind legislation, every child in grades 3 through 8 must be tested annually in both English language arts and in mathematics. So in spring of 2015, our students participated in the New York State versions of the exams. I always like to take a look at the data in terms of where were we the prior year, and then where were we in the year that we are reviewing. Oh, thank you very much, Pat. Okay. So just as a refresher, there are 4 performance levels that children are evaluated against, and on both the ELA and the math exam, the performance levels, 4 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. Many are aware that during the 2013-14 school year, we were all required to implement new standards known as the Common Core standards. And the definition of the performance levels changed. For level 4, children who achieve a level 4 are children who have exceeded or excelled in the standards for their particular grade level. For performance level 3, these are children who are proficient in the standards for their given grade level. A level 2 means that children are below or partially proficient in meeting the standards for their grade level, and level 1 means they are well below proficient. So when looking at a 2-year comparison for grades 3, 4, and 5, the green, of course, being grade 3, you can see that where the performance was in 2015 and then also in 2014. So in 2015, we had 49% of our children on the grade 3 ELA exam achieve levels 3 or 4, which are considered proficient and above proficient, while in 2014 we had 58%. The yellow for grade 4, you can see there was a small increase in the percentages at levels 3 and 4, while there was a decrease in grade 5. Looking at Weber's performance, again, you can see the comparable numbers. In some areas, we maintained the percentages, while in other areas, we showed a slight decrease. Now, there are a few things that are important to remember. In 2015, we had many, many more children who opted out or refused to take the New York State exams, and I'm going to go through these numbers with you. There actually is no provision in law that allows parents to opt their children out, but I think we all know that the opt-out movement really, I guess, took roots in this past year, not only in Port Washington, but certainly across the state. There were many, many more children who the prior year had participated in the exams, but who refused them in 2015. For example, of our combined numbers for grades 3 through 8, we had 22% of that population who refused to take the ELA exams in those grade levels. There were 63 in grade 3, or 12% of that total population. However, there is no state exam in grade 2, so there was no prior data to go back and take a look at and examine the performance of those children for the prior year. The fourth grade, of the 48 who opted out or who refused, 33% had taken the prior ELA exam in third grade, and all of them had actually achieved a level 3 or a level 4 in 2014. Similarly, of the 63 children in grade 5 who refused to take the exam, 27 of them, or 43%, had taken the prior year's fourth grade exam and achieved a level 3 or a level 4. Continuing on, 84% of grade 6 children who opted out of the exam had a prior year's ELA score. Of those, 46% of them, so almost half of them, had achieved a level 3 or 4 on the spring 2014 fifth grade exam. 53% of grade 7 opted out, pardon me, 53% of the seventh graders who opted out had achieved a level 3 or 4 on the prior year, and almost comparably, 47% of the eighth graders who opted out and had taken the exam the prior year had achieved a level 3 or a level 4. So I wanted to look at the cohort data. In other words, children who were in third grade in 2014, who were then in fourth grade and took the exam, what was the performance like? Now, I do have to say that although I looked at the cohort comparisons, please keep in mind this did not include the total cohort because of the numbers that I just went through and the percentages who opted out. So we're not looking at the total cohort, and so in a sense, we're not really comparing apples to apples. So you can see and looking at and I'll use the word cohort in quotation marks, you can see the performance for each of these grade levels on the ELA, and in some cases there were minor increases, in other cases there were decreases or we maintained. Bless you. I also took a look at the math performance. These are the grades 3 through 5 math, the two-year comparisons. Similar to the ELA, there were grades where we saw a decrease, others where we saw an increase, and so forth. You can see Weber for all three grade levels, again on the math performance. I'm going to come back to the eighth grade math performance in a few more minutes because there's additional information that I feel is important to share. I did the same thing for the math. I went back to every student that opted out of the math exam, and I actually reviewed their performance from the prior year. One, to determine, did they take the exam the prior year, and if so, what was their performance like? If you will recall, 22% of the combined 3 through 8 children had opted out of ELA. The math opt-outs were even higher than they were for the ELA. We saw an increase of 4 percentage points, so we had 26% of our 3 through 8 students who opted out of the math exam. 71 of them, or 12%, of the third graders who opted out, again, there was no prior score for me to take a look at because there is no second grade state exam. Of the 54 grade 4 students who opted out, 30% of them did have a prior year exam, and the results indicated that they had a level 3 or a level 4. Of the 78 fifth graders who opted out, 30% of them had a prior 4th grade score and achieved a level 3 or 4. And continuing on, 41% of the 6th grade students who opted out had achieved a level 3 or 4 on the 5th grade math exam. 70% of the grade 7 students who opted out had achieved a level 3 or 4 when they were 6th graders. And 73% of the 8th grade students who opted out achieved either a level 3 or a level 4. So again, I use the term cohort in quotation. Similar to the ELA, it's not a true cohort comparison due to the numbers of opt-outs. But you can see the results. Now, if you look at the 8th grade, what's important to remember on the 8th grade math is that we do have children who are accelerated. And so in addition to the numbers that opted out, we also had almost 100 students in 8th grade who did not participate in the New York State Grade 8 math exam because they participated in the Common Core Algebra Regent exam. These are children who are accelerated. I compared, of course, I looked at our data in relation to the state. I don't want to in any way indicate that the state bar is where our expectations are. Our expectations are much, much higher, but we are often asked, how did we do in comparison to the state? I'm not going to go through every grade level, but I will, just kind of breeze through it. What you will notice is that on every grade level for ELA, we were above the state average for levels 3 and 4, and of course also we were lower on levels 1 and 2. So for math, the performance levels, the definitions are the same as ELA. Those at level 4 excel and have exceeded the standards, and level 3 is proficient, level 2 is partially proficient, while level 1 is well below proficiency. So I compared also the math results to the states, and the red bar represents us, while the gray bar represents New York State. Again, on every grade level in mathematics, we were well above the state averages, even in 8th grade, with the high numbers of opt-outs, and also the fact that almost 100 students participated in the Common Core Algebra, we were still well above the state averages. Science at the elementary and middle school is the third accountability indicator. ELA and math are 2, of course, and science is the third accountability indicator. Now, the science exams are only given in grades 4 and 8. And you can see in terms of levels 3 and 4, we're way up there. We're almost at 100% for 4th grade and at 83% for 8th grade science. I looked also at the performance of our accelerated children, not only in mathematics, but in science. The accelerated students, there is no more Algebra 1. It is now Common Core Algebra that is required for all students. And even though the Common Core Algebra exam is much more rigorous than the prior Integrated Algebra 1, you can see that for both the Earth Science and the Common Core Algebra, 100% of our students passed these Regents exams. So I wanted to share a few things that, in terms of curriculum, that took place this summer. And these are only a few of the examples of the curriculum writing that took place this summer. We had teachers from across the grade levels, from kindergarten through 8th grade, who participated in the creation of what I believe to be our phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal curriculum maps for mathematics. And for these curriculum maps, we collectively meaning with teachers and administrators, we all got together and created templates that were uniformed for these curriculum maps. So the templates were similar in 8th grade as they were in kindergarten, so across the grade levels. I have to really take a couple of minutes to acknowledge all the teachers that spent time this summer working on these curriculum maps. They did an absolutely fantastic job. And I would like to, there are too many of them to name, but I would like to acknowledge the elementary math resource teachers and Callie Sanacola, who is the Weber math chair. They were, to say they were instrumental would be an understatement. They really helped to facilitate the creation of these curriculum maps, and truthfully, it could not have been done without their assistance. So I would like to acknowledge Lisa Cooper, Lori Garcia, Ruth Diaz, Sabrina Masson, and Heather O'Shea, and of course, as I mentioned, Callie Sanacola. They were really my right-hand people in getting these completed. There were other curriculum activities and projects that were conducted this summer, including curriculum for our English language learners, ESL, which is now known as ENL, English as a New Language, lessons for Smartboard Notebook and iPad technology. We had also some ENL curriculum focused on vocabulary that was completed. We also had poetry, creative writing, and narrative writing units. STEM instruction for grade 7 for the core extension, persuasive writing for English language learners, and Common Core writing. This was a wonderful project that was done collaboratively between our high school English department and our high school ESL/ENL departments. Common Core Algebra 2, which is a requirement for this year. Some of the high school, Brian Gorman and some other high school math teachers spent time updating and updating the curriculum maps for trigonometry 2, Algebra 2 trig, to ensure that they were aligned with Common Core expectations. And the last one, and I'd really like to sign up for this class, is we even had a bake shop, a new course that has been created at Schreiber High School, and some curriculum work was done in that area. And there was other work that was also completed this summer. These are only examples of what was completed. I would just like to take a couple of minutes. You heard me speak about the math curriculum maps. I just wanted to show you a sample of the amount of work that the teachers put into creating these curriculum maps. So you can see that for part of the templates that we created for these curriculum maps include highlighting what the chapter objectives, and by the way, these are aligned with Math in Focus, with the Math in Focus program that we implemented last year. So we outlined the objectives for each of the chapters, the content standards, the mathematical practices were embedded in these curriculum maps throughout, and also some notations and suggestions. So you can see that a lot of work, a lot of thought, and a lot of effort went into creating these. We will be, throughout the year, we will be reviewing these and getting feedback from teachers. So if any modifications need to be made to them, of course, we are completely open to that. One other thing I wanted to mention, because the Common Core requires that we really get into the depth of content, you will notice that the estimated number of days for this particular chapter is 14 days. Common Core planning and Common Core teaching requires that we now look at lessons really not as isolated lessons, but we look at lessons that are going to build upon each other, and really looking more at the creation of modules or units of study rather than viewing teaching as individual lessons. So again, you can just see from this example the amount of work that went into creating these curriculum maps. And again, I want to thank the teachers who worked very, very hard on developing these for kindergarten through 8th grade. So I wanted to also take a moment to thank Dr. Mooney and thank the board for all of your support. All of this work really could not be done without your ongoing support. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Westfeld, for that report. It was very thorough. Does anyone else have questions they want to start with? Chris, do you? Sure.
Thank you. I almost don't want to give the test this much attention, but I figured we might as well go over it a little bit since you actually put a lot of time and effort into these. My first question, it was ELA tests first in the year and then math. Is that why the higher opt-out rate went from ELA to math?
Yeah, usually they're a week apart. The ELA is always administered first, and then the math usually the following week.
So just quickly looking at the math part, because we had that big differential. Was this past year the first year that all 8th graders did not need to take the test? Because I vaguely remember something about a change in who was tested in 8th grade.
It was actually the second year that they did not, the accelerated children did not have to take the exam.
So I know that we instituted a new math program last year. So do you think that the differential in the grade in the 8th grade between the 1, 2, and the 3, 4s could also be related to a change in how the kids were taught math and maybe some confusion on the test at all?
I think, I don't know that we can attribute it to one individual factor. And when you're saying the differential, can you, are you?
Sorry, this past year was 48%, and then was it in the 70s or something the year before?
You're referring to 8th grade specifically?
8th grade math.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, again, as I mentioned before, it's not a true cohort comparison. And even from one year to the next, we did have much larger numbers of opt-outs in 2015, as I mentioned before, than 2014. I think that's a variable. I think the other variable is that we have, as I mentioned, almost 100 children who are accelerated, the assumption being if they had taken the math exam, they would be levels 3 and 4, right? That would be an assumption if they're accelerated, and hopefully all would have been a 4. So I think there are several contributing factors to that.
And then as far as AIS was concerned, because I know that it's usually if you get a 2 or 1, and then there was some like gray area. So because you actually have it bulked as level 1 and 2, we did have a significant increase in the amount of kids that initially qualified for AIS, and then we ended up switching some kids out, and then now are we using the NEEA also as part of the criteria for figuring out if a child needs AIS?
So when the AIS mandate first came out, it was very clear in that any child who achieves a level 1 or a level 2 must be provided AIS services. However, then RTI came out, and questions, RTI, which is federal, AIS state mandate, it raised a lot of questions about who now do we progress monitor, who do we service. The bottom line is we are looking at multiple measures to determine who needs AIS and who needs to be progress monitored under RTI. So we're not looking only at ELA and math. We are looking at NWEA, we are looking at class performance, we are looking at teacher recommendation. And because the AIS is really now what we would consider tier 2 of RTI, we're no longer looking at just that one measure.
So in theory, a child that opted out of the test still could qualify for AIS services based on other criteria. So if they didn't take the test, then they could, through the NWEA or whatever, they won't fall through cracks.
Without a doubt.
What's Bake Shop? Because I'm waiting for like some cookies or something, and they've never come.
I guess maybe Mr. Pernick it can help me out, but it's part of the Family and Consumer Science curriculum. I've offered to go in there and teach the kids how to make baklava, but so we'll see.
And just, it's funded this year by the Ed Foundation. It's one of the Ed Foundation grants. We'll be having a bake-off. We're all vying to be judges for the bake-off, so. We'll see if we can arrange that.
Yeah, thanks. A couple of questions. I took statistics many, many years ago, so I'm not all that current, and I've never been a test designer. But I'm of the understanding that when you administer an instrument to a large group, or N, results should fall along a bell curve. Do you know if the state results of these tests follow a bell curve?
So it's a very good question. Quite honestly, I don't know. We have to keep in mind the bell curve usually applies to norm referenced exams. These are criterion referenced exams.
Okay, and it's my understanding that according to the officials at State Ed, every student in the state should be able to get a 3 or 4 if we're doing our job correctly?
So under No Child Left Behind, every child was expected by 2013-14 to reach that level 4 mark. However, of course, we're past 2013-14 and new standards have come out. I think ultimately that is the goal. And so under Race to the Top, it's now, I guess the new definition is that every child will be college and career ready.
And if that meant they got a 1, that would be okay. So my other question is, these scores are normed. We don't know what the raw score is, and we don't know how that compares against the raw scores from year to year, because the cut scores change, and they can basically determine how many kids they want to be proficient and how many kids they don't want to be proficient. So even knocking out any of the opt-out kids, is it meaningful to talk about it when it's a political decision each year to determine how many kids are deemed to be proficient?
So with the implementation of the Common Core standards 2 years ago, the state completely changed the range of scores, and it's my understanding that they're going to keep them consistent in order to be able to have that longitudinal data and to measure growth.
Okay,
Could I just add that we are required to have a public discussion of the assessment results. It's a mandate. Unfunded mandate.
It's fine. I wasn't objecting to it. I'm just objecting to the potential relevance of it. Now I think I forgot my last question, but I'll come back to it after anybody.
Thank you, WAFA, for this report. I feel like I need to take it home and look at it, but then again, reflecting on what Larry said, it isn't, the cut scores are a moving target, so it's really hard to extrapolate some things. I don't know like what to do with it based on that, but I do have a couple of questions, but one question in particular. What do you attribute our higher performance in science? Consistently, we seem to do better in science, and I'm just wondering if you have a theory on that.
Well, I think it's a couple of factors. The scoring is very different. There is a performance part there are 2 components to the science exams. There's the written part and there's the performance part, where children go from station to station and complete a task. So that's one difference between the ELA and the math. But also the scoring itself, the range of scores is very different. And the 4th grade science exam is really more skills-based, whereas in 8th grade it's more content-based. So it's a few variables.
Just one quick point. When I look at the math analysis, we seem to jump on the cohort page consistently, again, 6, 7, and I know the 15 result is an outlier there, so it's hard to say, but 6, 7, 7, 8 are, what is it, literally 40% higher percentage-wise than the elementary math score, in 14 at least. This has been a trend now for a number of years where something is happening in the middle school math. Again, as much as you can normalize this, compared to the rest of the program. And we've discussed it before, and I just keep wondering, what are we doing there that allows us to, what apparently is improved efficiency? So whether it's, wherever you cut the test doesn't really change the fact that our number jumps in those years consistently for the last 3 or 4 years. And I just wish we could get our arms around what we're doing differently in the middle school, per se, in those 2 grades, that allows us to significantly move the kids up in subject-wise.
I know I mentioned this, it's hard to believe, a year ago, but I do remember mentioning this. We have to keep in mind our 7th and 8th grade teachers are math teachers, and they only teach mathematics. They're licensed and certified in mathematics. Our elementary teachers teach everything. So I do believe with the professional development that we have been providing, the fact that we have a structure to mathematics instruction, the fact that we have created these curriculum maps, these are all added benefits and added resources for the teachers. Other than that, the only other thing I can really think of is that as children move through the grades and they acquire the foundational skills for mathematics, when they get into the middle school, they have those strong foundational skills and they're able to perform better.
And would there be any connection between the jump in scores from 14 to 15 in every grade linked at all to the math program? I mean, to some degree, if the kids who were in 14 were all exposed in grades 3 through 8 to the sort of new math curriculum, and across every grade there is a substantial improvement in the number of children, even of the ones who didn't opt out, percentage-wise far greater than probably the standard deviation. And so there has to be some benefit or linkage, I would think, back to the change in the math curriculum year over year.
Yeah, I'd like to think that, of course, it is a contributing factor, but I also think the fact that we had professional development throughout the year. We also provided opportunities, which we're going to provide more of this year, for teachers to come by grade level together and articulate and share best practices. We did a little bit of in-class coaching last year. We intend on doing more of that this year. So I really think it's a combination. And as children, I guess, move through the grades and are more familiar with Common Core expectations and some common approaches to the teaching of mathematics, it can only help.
Just a couple of questions. The first, when do we get the scores, or when did the district get all the results?
We're always promised by July, but we've yet to receive them before August, and oftentimes late August.
So late August this year?
This year, I believe it was the 3rd week in August, maybe the 2nd, but it was definitely in August.
Okay. And just another question about the curricular mapping that was done over the summer. Have we looked at, or did you include, while you were mapping some of this curriculum, some modifications and clarifications for some of our special education students, and some ways to work with them to bring them up to those standards as well?
In the Math and Focus program and part of the professional development associated with it, There are strategies for not only helping students with disabilities, but also English language learners. And then also the trainers have worked with the teachers on helping to close the gap for children who did not have Common Core instruction the prior year. If you remember, the prior year we had piloted 2 math programs that were both Common Core aligned. And so some children had the benefit of either of the 2 programs, some did not. So the strategies, that's really part of the professional development work that was done, is helping the teachers understand and work with varying levels within the classroom. Always easier said than done.
And that's including also our self-contained teachers, both at the elementary school and in the MILE program?
I don't believe that those classes are using the programs fully. Again, they tailor the instruction to the needs of the children. So, okay.
I just wanted, a lot of my questions were already asked, but we obviously have a lot of discussion in the community about testing, and we've maintained that while it's not the most important thing, there are things we learn from them. So were there areas that you saw there were things we needed to work on that were helpful to you from all these results?
Yeah, when we look at the data, regardless of the controversy around testing and how people feel on either side of the issue, we do look at the data to see, are there particular gaps? Are there trends? Are there patterns that are jumping out at us? And then what do we do with it? So it's really looking at the data for instructional improvements. One of the, I guess, challenges is that in the past, State Ed would release the actual exams. So we could, for example, look at the item analyses, look at the kinds of questions children did well on and did not do well on, and go back to the questions. Now they only release a certain number. So we work with the information that we have. And, but we do look for trends and gaps and patterns as much as we can.
But on individual student basis, is it fair to say there's not usually any big surprises to classroom teachers?
I don't want to speak for them. I would venture to say probably not, because again, we don't look at this as the only measure, but probably for the most part I would say not. But there may be times when, a particular skill may come through as an area of deficit for a particular child or a small group of children, and that's where we have the conversations about flexible groupings.
Did remember my question. Common Core are standards, not curricula, as we keep being told, but what the students get taught in the classroom is curriculum. And so my question is, since some of the modules and some of the curricula available to the districts are written by the same people who write the assessment that is supposed to test the standards, is there a difference in the test scores of the people who use the curriculum that is designed by the people who wrote the assessment?
Quite honestly, Larry, I'm not sure that the creators of the exams are the creators of the modules. It's my understanding that teachers were included in the writing of the modules. In fact, let me just backtrack. The first company that was initially hired to write the modules, the first modules that appeared on Engage NY, some were okay, some were quite terrible. And so there was a lot of feedback given to the state education department about them either not being developmentally appropriate or they were not sequenced properly. And then another company was hired, and it's my understanding that that company, which has done a much better job of creating the modules, hires teachers to help write those modules.
Right, I understand that, I guess, but like when we were looking at Math in Focus, Math in Focus is developed by a company. I imagine Pearson has a math program through one of their subsidiaries. One would imagine that since that is the company, regardless of whether they reach out to teachers to write the modules or reach out to teachers to help develop the tests, they're starting out with the same, sort of with the same mindset and the same view of how to convert those standards into curriculum. So, I mean, it seems to me that we say that teachers have ultimate flexibility in teaching the standards however they want, but then in the test, they're required to do the math with the little loops. You know, so, which is a curriculum to me, not a standard. A standard is knowing how to add and subtract. You know, curriculum is telling them how to do it. And so the fact that you must do it in that way is not really giving the teacher the freedom to teach the way they want. It's telling the teacher, you damn well better teach it exactly this way or your kids are going to fail. So, so it would seem to me that if you're buying the materials from the same company that is creating the test, you might do better. One other comment, as far as I know, science is not Common Core yet. So I imagine that when the Common Core standards for science come out and is tested 2 years later, we will see a precipitous drop in our numbers of 3s and 4s?
Well, there is no talk of Common Core science. However, there is talk of possibly next generation science standards. Whether there's a plan to eventually have testing in science, I'm not really sure. And which grade levels, I'm really not sure. Right now, there has been no talk about creating any new science exams.
We give them at 4 and 8 now, and that's probably not going to go away.
I don't believe they're going away, but as far as, maybe I should clarify. As far as new exams that would be aligned with either, if New York State, the Board of Regents is expected either in January 2016, but now there are rumors that it may be January 2017. The Board of Regents is expected to vote on a new set of science standards. They may or may not be the next generation science standards. So one, we're not sure if it will happen this January or the following. And if, regardless, I don't know if there is a plan yet to then implement new science assessments. I don't know what the plan is. So in the meantime, these exams, as far as we know, for 4th and 8th grade are not going away.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's it for our discussion, and thank you again. I know we'll be hearing from you again in the course of the year. We'll move to the committee reports, policy and personnel.
I don't think we've had a Policy and Personnel Committee meeting since our last session here, last open meeting, but we do have one coming up this Friday, and we have 2 topics of conversation. We will be discussing shared decision-making committees and whether or not board members can participate. They cannot, but talking about creating a policy regarding that. And we'll also be talking, if we, depending on how that conversation goes, we may just start discussing how we want to create the policy on shared decision-making committees, and then go ahead and talk about enhancing communication between the board and the community, which is also one of our goals for the year.
Budget and facilities?
Nothing since the last. We have a meeting Monday at 8:15.
Thank you. Curriculum?
Curriculum, we had a joint meeting with budget on the 9th, which I think was after our last meeting, right? And anyway, that was on enrichment, and it was lively, yes. And I think it was good. I think we heard a lot from the community. We just heard a lot from administration. Basically, where we came out is, it's being looked at. Nothing is being decided instantaneously. It's going to be a thorough process, and we're looking for the best way to provide the best education to the most number of students that we possibly can. And that's always been it, and sometimes stories get a life of their own. But okay, and then we also met last week on the 16th. We had a meeting discussing the class sizes over and under the limits at Weber and Schreiber. We got a lot of information from both of the schools about the scheduling and about how things work, and discussions of the dropout rates at the high school between where people would go from honors to regular or from AP down to honors and things like that, and how that affects class size and how that affects scheduling and everything else, and that you know, I guess bottom line is, if we could do anything we wanted, we would have more classrooms and more teachers in smaller classes, but, you know, there's some pretty compelling arguments for the way they're doing it now, and again, that's an issue that's always being looked at and always being worked on, and that was a very productive meeting. And we're meeting again next month on the 13th, Friday the 13th? No. That's right, that's when it was moved from. Do we have the agenda for that yet? 24th. Oh, it's the 24th, okay. And we do not have the agenda yet because Dr. Westerveld is working with different people to see whether or not they will be ready for our discussion.
I just wanted to add for the community that we will be hearing back from the administration on some further research and discussion on the enrichment programs in December. The date's to be determined, but we had asked for a lot of information, so we'll be hearing it back then, and we will post the time and date and everything about the meeting, let everybody know. Now we will go on to our action items, and I believe I must call on Mrs. Callahan.
Yes, I failed to provide the superintendent's office with the standard resolution for the board to accept the audit that was presented by the auditor. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to add item A2, which simply would state, resolve that the Board of Education accepts the independent audit report prepared by D'Arcangelo and Company dated June 30th, 2015 for the 2014-15 fiscal year.
So what she said, I'll call to question. Do I have a second, Mr. Greenstein? Any discussion? All in favor? 6-0, thank you.
Thank you.
And now I will move items A1 through D11, pulling C16 through 19. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson, any discussion? All in favor? 6-0, okay, thank you. And now we'll move to items C16 through 19, which are the class sizes that, wait, hold everything. I have to go back and thank the Weber Middle School HSA, the Manor Haven PTA, the Fit America, Nassau Zone of the New York State Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, South Salem Elementary HSA several times, the Weber Middle School HSA, the Sousa HSA, Hearts, Guggenheim HSA, and Witten Wim, and Stephanie Gray Schwartz and Mitchell Schwartz to the Safety and Substance Abuse Task Force, all of those people for their very generous donations to our school district. Now I will move items C16 through 19, which are the class sizes. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson, do we have any discussion? I would just like to say that we did meet and discuss this in curriculum. We had a lot of questions answered regarding why various class sizes in the high school and the middle school are over or under what our policies are. We are working diligently to still close that gap and have less class sizes that are over, which is really, I think, probably of more importance to all of us on behalf of our students, and the ones that are smaller because of the financial realities that it's very hard to maintain those classes. And we are getting closer and closer, particularly in the science classes. We are looking as one of our goals to really have those numbers down one way or another, and working on that for next year so that by the time our construction on our new labs is done, which only have 30 lab stations, we will be able to have only 30 students. And in the elementary schools, I think the community knows there's been a lot of discussion because there are some sections that really are far over the class size policy, or at least far enough over that we're very concerned, and we are looking to see what we can do that for next year, both because of the financial situation and the space situation. We just don't have enough classrooms, which is why we are building onto the buildings. So with all of that said, I think we're ready to call to question, or you have a question? or
No,
a
I was
comment?
just going to
Okay.
say, with that said too, I think it was also reiterated that everybody has a desk to sit at. So if people are saying that they're sitting on radiators and whatever else, it's really only because they want to warm up and not because they don't have a desk.
Okay, I'll call to question. All in favor? 6-0. Thank you very much, and thank you to the central administration and all of the building principals, and particularly Mr. Shields and Mr. Pernick, who gave us so much time with answering all these questions. It is an area of great concern to us as we go forward, and I'm going forward. Okay, so now we move on to old business. Does anyone have any old business? New business. We now have another, Mr. Gridstein.
Just want to report, we had the, Nora, Chris, and I were at the New York State School Boards Convention. And anyway, one of the two amendments to proposals that we worked on was accepted. It was actually the one I thought had a lesser chance of being accepted, and the one I thought was a slam dunk lost. But, so anyway, so we are now officially part of the resolutions of the New York State School Boards Association, and that was the amendment we put in on testing to reach out to other stakeholders and have superintendents and administrators and teachers be part of the process along with New York State School Boards and SED in helping to design a better test protocol.
We'll put it on the next agenda. What do we?
I was just going to also say that we also had our first new legislative, not task force, but committee meeting, which Dr. Mooney sat in, and we had some new community members there, which we came up with some goals and some good thought processes on how to move forward and try to be a little more vocal and effective in the legislative aspect. It was, as far as I'm concerned, a good starting point. And I know that a couple of people had a few marching orders, which they've been working hard to get us back, get that together. So
We'll now go to community comments. We will have the 3-minute limit and ask that you please identify yourself for the record.
Tessa Jordan, just as an aside first, in terms of your question about the science test, Nora, having administered the science test for many years, one reason I would say why children are able to do well on it is it's written in a way that a reasonably average ability fourth-year student can read all the questions and understand what they mean. And that certainly is a benefit when you're taking a test, if you can read all the words. However, what I wanted to say in terms of the opting out was that I don't think it's really fair to characterize children between grades 3 and 8 as refusing to take the test. I think that inadvertently suggests kind of a willful disobedience. I think a more appropriate way to characterize those children would simply be say that those are children whose parents chose that they not take the test.
Judy Epstein. About the tests, my understanding of the district's performance on the 1s and 2s versus the 3s and 4s when you compared with New York State, even accepting the children who weren't in the rooms, we had fewer 1s and 2s than New York State's numbers and more 3s and 4s. So I don't understand why Governor Cuomo is telling us how to run our schools. That's my first point. He has other people who need his expert advice more. The rest of New York State. It also, from Larry's comment, it seems as if the difference between this bell curve kind of a test, which these aren't, and the kind that it is, the image that struck me is if you're asking all of the children in the district to jump over hurdles this high. And that's the highest they ever get. I definitely want the kids who need AIS to get it, no question. I want something to catch the kids who need the help, whether it's this or whatever. But that being said, if a kid can jump over this, and that's a 4, you'll never know what they could do. And that's the worst thing about these tests. The tests themselves are not very ambitious, and they don't tell you anything instructive anymore. You don't get back, oh, they all missed the chapter on continental shift or whatever. We don't even get that, and you don't get it in time for placement for the next year. And they cheat with what they decide the kids' scores will be anyway. So I love those tests.
Annette Melkonian. I just wanted to reinforce the lack of transparency in these exams, both in terms of quality, in terms of actual answers that are wrong. There are many websites out there that show little pictures taken of these tests that they're not supposed to have because of the lack of transparency. They are all over the internet. They are all about examples of problems with these exams, and nobody is allowed to talk about it. That affects our kids, that affects our teachers, that affects our district. And it costs money. Thank you.
If there are no other community comments at this time, we're adjourned. Thank you.